The decline and fall. The objectives are: 1. Explain why the Roman Empire gained a new lease on life under Diocletian and Constantine. And 2, analyze how ferocious warriors from Asia and Germany finally brought an end to the Roman Empire. Now, last time we were talking a bit about the cultural kind of changes that were existing within the Roman Empire, which is connected to the decline of the Roman political structure. Following the various collapses of civil wars and strifes that had emerged in the 2nd century, a military government under the Severan rulers restored order. And so by the 3rd century, from 235 to 284, the Roman throne was occupied by whoever had military strength to seize it. And we see a tumultuous, chaotic time within this 3rd century, a reaction to the external conflict that had arisen earlier on. And so we see 22 emperors come to the throne and then tossed out by competitors in this short span of time. The empire had certainly collapsed in its true political vigor and had become quite chaotic. The empire was troubled by various invasions. Sassanids from the east, Germanic tribes in the Balkans, Gaul and Spain, various political upheavals that led to a tumultuous time. Now, the problem was that there were various economic and military problems. Invasions, civil wars, and plagues came close to causing an economic collapse of the Roman Empire. And it's really under an economic collapse that many of these problems arise. There were, some have argued, labor shortages, which were created by plague and affected both military recruiting and the economy. Now, whether this was the true cause of decline, it's unclear. There are various theories, and none are verified or true, perhaps. But by the mid-3rd century, the state had relied on hiring of Germans to fighting alongside the Roman commanders. And so this tendency among this policy in which you have Germans fighting for Romans against German invaders seems problematic. They're mercenaries, to be sure, but there seemed little loyalty to the empire or to the emperors, and really loyalty to the coin. Now, this, of course, is problematic when you might have a economic decline, and so little coin, little loyalty. And so this may have been one of the major problems, of course, with dealing with external incursions from other people. Now, one solution, creative for sure, was the reforms of Diocletian. Now, during the 3rd and 4th centuries, major changes occurred. There were 2 emperors that are worthy of naming, Diocletian first and Constantine. They formed the late Roman Empire. Now, Diocletian ruled from 284 to 305, and he divided the empire into 4 units. Each with its own ruler under one supreme of the 4. So here, what we mean by this is, and this is a classic image, if you can see there, the 4 men clasping each other, these each were a sort of emperor. And that the Roman Empire had been divided into quadrants, and each person ruled that region. But in each region, there was one supreme over the other. So the names that they took were the supreme of the west, Augustus, and the supreme of the east, Augustus, and the lesser on each segment was Caesar and Caesar. Now, the concept was that by dividing the empire up into these quadrants, each one of these generals could better manage the problems that existed within their regions. The army was enlarged to 500,000, including the Germans, and this size, of course, drained public funds. You have an economic problem there. But nevertheless, it was realized that to maintain the empire, one needed these huge funds that didn't necessarily exist exist. Now, of course, when you reach these problems, you have extreme inflation. Inflation occurs. Now, Diocletian issued a price edict in 301, which fixed the wage and price control in the region, which, of course, was an attempt to fix the problem of inflation. However, it ended up causing a lot more problems. The emperors issued edicts that forced people to remain in their designated vocations, meaning they couldn't shift around. There was no real movable social ability, no social mobility, and so these are some major problems that existed, and political unrest, social unrest was inevitable. Now, Constantine ultimately sought to overthrow and collect all power to himself at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, as was mentioned previously. Now, Constantine moved, ultimately after this victory, moved to the capital, and moved the capital from Rome, which is where it used to be, to Byzantium in the east, which is largely where political isolation existed. So there's better geographical isolation, but also economic wealth. And so here, Byzantium on the Bosphorus was renamed Constantinople after his own name, Constantine. And here we see then a new Roman capital, no longer in Rome. This is, of course, signaled to many historians the final end of the Roman Empire as we know it. Now, these people still consider themselves Romans, so it's unlikely we can really say that this would be the end of the Roman Empire, perhaps. But nevertheless, this was a major change in what we know as Rome. Now, when we talk about the fall, what we're really talking about is a total and political collapse. Now, after Constantine, the empire continued to be divided into western and eastern parts. And so we end up talking about Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire. Now, the Western Roman Empire came under increased pressure from invading tribes with very little coin of their own to really maintain a standing army or to really block out these invaders. Inevitably, various tribes of invaders ended up migrating and pressing into the region. The most famous of this is the Huns. The Huns migrated into the region and put pressure on the indigenous Germanic tribes, particularly the Visigoths, who moved south and west, crossing the Danube River into what was the Roman Empire. And so this is the first major sign of the decline and collapse of the Western Roman Empire in a political sense. In 410, the Visigoths sacked Rome, that is, conquered Rome, and the Vandals poured into southern Spain and Africa and sacked Rome in 455. Certainly by this time we have a continual collapse of this political Western structure. In 476, the last remaining Roman ruler, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the German army. Odoacer was the ruler's name. And the East, of course, continued to thrive, but the Western Roman Empire officially collapsed. And so here we can really talk about the end of at least the political Roman Western Empire. Now the question is that really the Roman Empire? I mean, you still have the Eastern Empire, and you still have a Roman cultural tradition. Does that mean that the Romans don't exist anymore? I mean, this is kind of a tricky question. I mean, imagine if the United States were to collapse tomorrow. Does that mean that tomorrow that there are no Americans? They wouldn't see that themselves. In fact, they would still believe that they are. And in fact, that tradition might maintain itself. So it's an interesting question that historians have debated continuously on when or if the Roman Empire actually collapsed and at what segment. Now here in this infograph you can see first off the division of the Roman Empire. Here you see a Western and an Eastern Roman Empire. But also we see the shift from Rome to Constantinople, two centers of the Roman Empire. And then with these arrows, you see the migratory patterns of these barbarian incursions into Rome, through Spain, into Africa. And so largely, when you look at this, we're talking about the Western Roman Empire. You can see most of the troop movements, most of the political collapse occurs in the West, but Constantinople remains untouched. So these are some major factors that need to be considered when we talk about decline. Now, of course, one of the key concepts here is that the Han Chinese Empire and the Roman Empire have vast similarities across the globe from one another. Both the Han Dynasty in China and the Roman Empire lasted for centuries. Both governed large areas. They instituted and maintained laws. Both empires experienced problems for acquiring too much land. They built walls, fortifications, troops, and both fell to invaders. In fact, there are many, many other examples which should be explored and actually is a great essay to consider. But here we see that similar problems exist independently across the globe in different times and in different regions. Now, it just so happens that the Han Empire, the Han Dynasty, and the Roman Empire existed in roughly the same kind of time period. However, there are various comparisons that could be made throughout human history. Now, to address the objectives again then, 1, explain why the Roman Empire gained a new lease on life under Diocletian and Constantine, largely through the division of the empire into those quadrants and through the adoption of other religions, particularly Christianity. So that ended some of the social strife. And then 2nd, analyze how ferocious warriors from Asia and Germany finally brought an end to the Roman Empire.